It was a night like any other in one of the most luxurious restaurants in Los Angeles. The ambient lighting was soft and warm. The chatter of well-dressed diners filled the air, and the clinking of fine china and glasses created a symphony of elegance. This was a place where the rich and powerful gathered, where deals were made and secrets exchanged over expensive wine and gourmet dishes. But tonight, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would shake the very foundation of this pristine establishment. Elon Musk, the billionaire CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, walked into the restaurant with a small entourage of business associates. He was casually dressed, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, his signature look that made him stand out even more in a room full of designer suits and gowns. His presence was magnetic, but he wasn't the type to draw attention unless he wanted to. Most of the guests had no idea who he was, but that didn't matter. The few who recognized him quickly turned back to their conversations, their minds already busy with other things. As they were led to their table by the maitre d', a young woman in her late 20s, with dark skin and a sharp, focused gaze, was waiting for them. Her name was Jada, and tonight, she had no idea who Elon Musk was. To her, he was just another guest, just another rich person who was going to order a 3-course meal and likely leave a generous tip. That was how she saw it anyway, or perhaps that was how she wished she could see it. Jada had her own worries, her daughter, her bills, her life. She didn't have time for the powerful people who came through these doors. Jada was known for being assertive, almost too assertive, some would say. She was proud of her job, but working in a high-end restaurant wasn't easy, especially when it felt like the world around you constantly tried to remind you that you were just a small part of a much bigger machine. She had learned to keep her head down and get through each shift as best as she could. But tonight, things would be different. As she approached Elon's table, she did what she always did. She took a deep breath, gave a polite smile, and prepared to take their drink orders. But something about Elon Musk rubbed her the wrong way, even though she didn't know who he was. Maybe it was his air of superiority, or maybe the fact that he didn't seem to notice the rest of the world around him. To Jada, it was as if he was living in his own bubble, above everyone else, and that bothered her more than she cared to admit. "Good evening," Jada said, her tone professional, but tinged with a subtle edge. "What can I get you to drink?" Elon looked up from his phone, scanning the menu before him. He looked up again, his eyes scanning her for a brief moment. She noticed him looking at her, but she wasn't sure what he was thinking. He gave her a half-hearted smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll have a glass of your finest red wine," he said, his voice cool and indifferent. His words were simple enough, but there was something about his delivery, something that grated on Jada's nerves. She nodded, already turning to leave, when he added, "Make it quick." The command wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a cold jab in the chest. Jada paused, her hand on the edge of the menu, her heart pounding. There was a moment, just a fleeting one, where she thought about just walking away. But she didn't. Instead, she turned back, her voice icy as she said, "I'm not your servant. I'm your waitress." The words were out before she could stop them. She knew they sounded harsh, but there was something inside her that couldn't let it go. There was something about the way he had spoken to her, as though she were nothing more than an invisible figure in the background, a mere accessory to his dining experience. Elon blinked, caught off guard for a brief moment. The table fell silent, his business associates exchanging puzzled glances. Jada's face flushed with heat as she immediately regretted her outburst. But it was too late. The damage was done. The moment stretched into a tense silence, and Jada turned to walk away. But not before she heard one of Elon's associates mutter, "Does she even know who he is?" Jada's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who he was, and frankly, she didn't care. He was just another wealthy person with a big ego. Her mind raced as she walked toward the bar to place their drink order, trying to shake off the discomfort that had suddenly taken hold of her. But it wasn't just the discomfort that lingered in the air. There was something else, a strange sensation that this wasn't just another night at work. Something had shifted, something big. The question now was, how would this encounter unfold? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jada stood behind the bar, her hands shaking slightly as she poured wine into a glass. She had never been the type to let things bother her, especially not at work. But tonight felt different. The exchange with Elon Musk, or rather, the way she had spoken to him, gnawed at her in a way she couldn't explain. She tried to shake it off, but the sting of her own words lingered. What had come over her? She had been working at this upscale restaurant for nearly 5 years, and she knew better than to speak out of turn, especially not to someone who might hold all the power in the world. But there was something about his condescending tone, that dismissive air, that had triggered something deep inside her. Jada wasn't the type of person to let herself get walked on. She had spent too many years fighting for respect, for dignity, for a chance to prove herself in a world that often overlooked people like her. The struggles she had faced had shaped her into the woman she was today. A woman who didn't bow down to anyone, no matter how rich or famous they were. She wiped the counter and refilled another glass, the motion automatic as her mind wandered back to her past. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Jada had grown up in a neighborhood where dreams were often crushed by harsh realities. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, while her father had disappeared when she was just a toddler. She had learned early that the world didn't owe her anything. If she wanted something, she would have to fight for it. School had been a refuge for Jada. She was smart, resourceful, and driven. Her teachers saw potential in her, and for a brief moment, she thought she might make it out of her circumstances. She dreamed of becoming a software engineer, someone who could create, innovate, and escape the cycle of poverty that seemed to follow her at every turn. But dreams don't always survive the brutalities of real life. Jada's world came crashing down when she found out she was pregnant at 17. Her daughter, Zoe, was the best thing that ever happened to her, but the timing couldn't have been worse. The financial strain of raising a child on her own forced Jada to put her education on hold. She had tried to juggle school and work, but after a few years, it became clear that something had to give. At 21, Jada dropped out of college and took a job at the restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave her the flexibility she needed to raise Zoe. The hours were long, the pay was low, and the work was physically demanding, but she did it with a determination that no one, not even the rich customers who frequented the place, could understand. Her coworkers often told her she had a bright future ahead of her, if she wanted it. But Jada was tired. She had already sacrificed so much, and with each passing year, it felt harder to hold on to the dreams of her youth. She was just a waitress now, and that was okay. For a while, it was enough. But something had shifted recently. The exhaustion in her bones was starting to give way to a restless energy, a desire to do more. She didn't want to be stuck serving people like Elon Musk forever, watching them indulge in a life of luxury while she scraped by. She wanted to find a way out. If not for herself, then for Zoe. Her daughter was everything to her. Zoe had just turned 6, and Jada could see the fire in her daughter's eyes, the same spark that had once burned inside her. Zoe was smart, curious, and full of potential. Jada often wondered if her daughter would be able to escape the same traps that had held her down, or if she would find herself in the same cycle of struggle that had defined Jada's life. Jada didn't want that. She refused to let her daughter grow up in the same world she had. She had to do something, even if she wasn't sure what that something was yet. As she walked back to the dining area, she took a deep breath, trying to push the weight of her thoughts aside. She had a job to do. But the encounter with Elon Musk, the way he had treated her, kept echoing in her mind. Maybe it was the fact that he was so indifferent, so above it all. Maybe it was the way he looked through her, as though she were invisible. Maybe it was the way he spoke to her, as if she were no more significant than a waiter or a bellboy. Whatever it was, she knew it wasn't just about him. It was about everything. The way people like him had the power to shape the world, while people like her struggled just to survive. Jada wasn't sure what had come over her in that moment, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let it slide. She wasn't going to apologize for standing up for herself, even if she had no idea who the man was. In her world, respect was earned, not given. But little did Jada know, her bold confrontation would be the beginning of a much bigger story. A story that would change the course of her life, and Elon Musk's, forever. While Jada was still digesting the exchange, her words hanging in the air like a sharp breeze. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, his mind not quite on the meal in front of him. It wasn't the first time he had been confronted by someone like Jada, though the situation felt different, more jarring than usual. As a billionaire, he was accustomed to attention, both good and bad, but most people, especially those in his social circles, knew better than to challenge him outright. It wasn't that Elon cared for flattery, but he did expect a certain level of respect. It was a matter of course. Yet something about Jada's defiance felt raw, genuine. He took a sip of his wine, his thoughts wandering, even as he tried to focus on the conversation with his colleagues. They were discussing the latest developments at SpaceX, the ambitious goals for Mars, and how his latest ventures in AI might revolutionize the world. But Elon's mind kept slipping back to Jada, the young waitress who had dared to speak to him the way she had. Most people in his orbit weren't bold enough to address him directly, much less with such a sharp tone. But it wasn't just the challenge. It was the way she had looked at him, as if she wasn't impressed by his wealth, his status, or the companies he ran. She saw him as just another man at a table. A man who, for all his money and fame, hadn't earned any more respect than anyone else. Elon was no stranger to the feeling of being underestimated. In fact, he thrived on it. Throughout his life, he had been told he was crazy, too ambitious, or downright impossible to work with. People had laughed when he said he wanted to build electric cars or send humans to Mars. But despite all the doubters, here he was, leading one of the world's most valuable companies and charting a course for the stars. The critics had been wrong, and he had been right. But Jada's words stirred something within him. She had seen him not as a billionaire genius, but as a man. Just a man. No better than the people she worked with every day. Elon thought about his own journey. He was born in Pretoria, South Africa, to a father who was wealthy but distant, and a mother who was strong and determined. His childhood was far from perfect, marked by the typical trials of being an awkward, introverted kid. Elon had always been obsessed with learning, reading everything from science fiction novels to physics textbooks. He had big ideas, but no one really cared. He often felt like an outsider, someone who couldn't quite fit into the world around him. It wasn't until he moved to the United States to study at the University of Pennsylvania that he began to find his footing. In the early years, he worked tirelessly on his companies, Zip2, then PayPal, and despite the odds, he built something successful. But that was just the beginning. He wasn't interested in merely making money. Elon had always wanted to change the world. And so, he did, starting with electric cars, taking on the fossil fuel industry, and launching rockets into space. But no matter how much he achieved, there was always a nagging feeling that his personal life was somehow out of sync. He had been married twice, had children, but none of his relationships seemed to withstand the pressures of his ambitions. His focus had always been on the big picture, on making humanity a multiplanetary species. Everything else came second. Now, as he sat in this luxurious restaurant, surrounded by the finest people money could buy, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was alone. Was it possible to have everything in the world and still feel empty? To be revered by millions, but unable to connect with anyone who truly understood him? In a way, Jada's challenge was a reminder of something he had forgotten. He had become so consumed by his own ambition that he had lost touch with what really mattered: human connection, respect, and the shared struggles that bind us all. As the conversation at the table continued, Elon's thoughts drifted back to her. He wondered, what had driven her to speak to him like that? Was she frustrated with her life, like he had been once? Was she struggling in ways he could never understand? He could never know for sure, but one thing was certain. He wanted to find out. The night stretched on, and the tension at Elon's table simmered beneath the surface. Jada had gone back to the bar after their brief confrontation, trying to focus on her work and ignore the thoughts swirling in her mind. But there was something about that interaction with Elon Musk that refused to fade. It wasn't just the words she had spoken. It was the ripple effect they seemed to cause. She could feel eyes on her as she moved around the restaurant, her colleagues whispering, casting glances in her direction. She tried to focus on the task at hand, clearing a nearby table, but her mind kept racing back to Elon. Why had she reacted the way she had? He was just another rich guy, wasn't he? Another arrogant, self-absorbed millionaire who probably didn't give a damn about people like her. But there was something different about him too, a quiet intensity, something in his eyes that made her pause. She had seen it before, in the faces of people who were deeply troubled, consumed by ambition, or fighting their own demons. As she walked back to Elon's table to check on their orders, she noticed something unusual. He wasn't surrounded by the usual chatter of his colleagues. They were talking, but Elon seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze drifting absently over the menu. He looked human, vulnerable, even. It was strange. She had expected him to be more like the others, untouchable, completely self-assured, as if the world revolved around him. But instead, she saw a man who seemed almost out of place in this glittering environment. It reminded her of a young, struggling entrepreneur trying to make his mark in a world that didn't care. Had he always been like this? For a moment, Jada considered just leaving him alone. But there was a pull, a curiosity that tugged at her. Her mind raced through the past few years of her life, her struggles as a single mom, her dreams that never fully took flight, her daily fight just to survive, and she thought, maybe he's just like me. Maybe he's not so different. Jada took a deep breath and walked up to the table, this time with a different attitude. She didn't let her nerves show, and her voice was more controlled, though still firm. "Is everything okay with your meal?" she asked, giving him a quick glance before looking at the rest of the table. Elon looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers this time, not with that usual aloofness, but with an almost questioning look. He paused before answering. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said quietly. "Thank you." There was a slight pause before he added, "I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to come off that way." Jada's heart skipped. She wasn't expecting an apology from him. She had assumed he was the type who would brush off the incident, who would treat it like nothing more than a blip in his busy night. But there he was, acknowledging her, offering a rare moment of humility. She stared at him for a moment, unsure how to respond. The anger she had felt earlier had already started to dissipate, but there was still a lingering sense of pride that made it hard to fully forgive him. "You didn't have to apologize," Jada replied, her tone softer now. "But I don't appreciate being treated like I'm invisible." Elon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said. "I've been so focused on my work lately, I guess I've forgotten what it's like to just be. Sometimes, it's easy to treat people like they're just part of the scenery." Jada could hardly believe her ears. He gets it? This man, who could buy anything he wanted, who had changed industries and disrupted the world in ways most people couldn't even imagine, was acknowledging her. Someone who had never even had the chance to dream as big as he had. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Jada felt as if she were seeing a completely different side of him. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the arrogant billionaire she had assumed him to be. Before Jada could respond, one of Elon's colleagues, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s, leaned forward and gave her an appraising look. "So, tell me," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "how long have you been working here?" Jada wasn't sure why, but something about his tone irritated her. Maybe it was the way he addressed her, like she was just another cog in the machine, a part of the service he felt entitled to. She took a breath, forcing herself to maintain her composure. 5 years, she replied flatly, looking at him and then at the rest of the table. "And it's been an interesting ride." Elon's colleague seemed intrigued. "That's impressive. Most people don't last that long in this industry." "Yeah, well," Jada said with a half-smile, "I guess I'm stubborn." There was a brief silence, and then Elon, almost as if he was thinking out loud, spoke again. "You know," he said slowly, his eyes flicking back to Jada, "I didn't get to where I am by being comfortable. Sometimes, the most uncomfortable moments lead to the biggest breakthroughs." Jada tilted her head, considering his words. "That's easy for you to say," she muttered, "but not as a challenge, more as a recognition of the massive gap between their worlds. You've already made it. You've got everything." Elon looked at her, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "Yeah," he said softly, "but I don't know if I've really found everything yet." His words hung in the air, and Jada felt something shift, an almost unspoken understanding passing between them. For the first time that evening, The distance between them felt smaller, the gulf between his world and hers narrowing. Before she could say anything more, she turned to leave, but not before catching a glimpse of Elon's face as he watched her walk away. There was a flicker of something that looked almost like respect. Or maybe it was curiosity. Jada couldn't quite tell, but one thing was certain. This night wasn't over yet. As the evening wore on, Jada found herself glancing over at Elon's table more frequently than she would have liked. There was something unsettling about the way the encounter had unfolded. It was rare for her to feel any kind of connection with a customer, especially not someone like Elon Musk, someone so far removed from her everyday reality. But something in his eyes, something genuine, raw, kept drawing her attention back. Her shift was almost over, but she still had a few tables to tend to before she could leave. Every time she approached a table, her thoughts seemed to drift back to Elon. His apology had been unexpected, but what struck her more was his admission that he didn't have everything figured out. He doesn't have it all, Jada thought, as if trying to convince herself. Just because he's rich doesn't mean he has all the answers. At that moment, a feeling she hadn't expected stirred in her, empathy. There was a part of her that could relate to the loneliness he had hinted at. She had spent years grinding away in this restaurant, never fully achieving what she had hoped for, but still dreaming of something more. Elon, in his own way, was just another person trying to find meaning amidst the chaos of his success. He had everything: money, fame, power, but he still seemed lost. As she served the last of her tables, Jada couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this story. Could her brief interaction with Elon Musk be the start of something different for her? Or was she just projecting her own dissatisfaction onto him, looking for something more because she wasn't satisfied with where she was in life? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her daughter, Zoe. "Mom, can you pick me up from Grandma's after work? I miss you." Jada smiled softly at the message. It was a reminder of what mattered most to her. Zoe was the light of her life, and everything she did, every late shift, every sacrifice, was for her. If she could give Zoe a better life, a life where she didn't have to struggle the way Jada had, it would all be worth it. With that thought, she headed toward the back of the restaurant to clock out. But just as she was about to leave, she was stopped by the maitre d', who looked at her with a strange expression. "Jada, can you come with me for a moment?" he asked, his voice unusually serious. Jada's heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong?" she asked, a sudden anxiety creeping up her spine. The maitre d' just shook his head. "It's not about that. It's about Elon Musk. He wants to speak with you." Jada froze. "What? Me?" The maitre d' nodded. "Yes. He asked to see you before you leave." Jada's mind raced. What could he possibly want with me? She wasn't sure whether to feel nervous, excited, or even a little bit defensive. Was he about to reprimand her for the earlier exchange? Or was this something else entirely? The maitre d' led her to a small private room at the back of the restaurant, where Elon was sitting at a table, his elbows resting on the surface. The moment he saw her, he stood up, as if expecting her. "Jada," he said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of something. Curiosity, perhaps, beneath the surface. "I wanted to talk to you for a moment." Jada's stomach fluttered, and she could feel her palms sweating. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elon smiled, but it was a quiet smile, not the smug, self-assured grin she had expected. "I think you were right about me earlier," he said. "I don't usually listen to people who work for me, or anyone, for that matter. I've spent so much time building companies and chasing dreams that I've neglected what matters most." "What you said, it made me think." Jada blinked, taken aback by his words. He's really acknowledging this? She thought. "I didn't mean to make you feel small, Jada," he continued. "I can be a bit, much sometimes. But you were right to stand up for yourself." Jada didn't know what to say. She had been prepared for some kind of confrontation, but this was unexpected. She hadn't anticipated Elon Musk, of all people, acknowledging her feelings. She had thought he would just brush it off, like most wealthy people did when faced with criticism from someone in her position. "I didn't expect an apology," she said after a pause, her voice soft. I just wanted to make sure you understood I'm not invisible. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers. I get that now, and I appreciate your honesty. It's not something I hear a lot of these days. There was a brief silence between them. Then Elon cleared his throat, as if something had occurred to him. Jada, I know this might sound strange, but do you ever think about doing more? More than waiting tables. I mean, you seem like someone who could be doing a lot more. Jada's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. More, she echoed. What do you mean? Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table thoughtfully. You're sharp. I can see that. You speak your mind. You don't let people walk all over you. People like that, people with fire in their eyes, don't usually end up stuck behind a bar or serving meals for a living. I'm just curious if you've ever thought about taking that energy somewhere else, doing something bigger. Jada wasn't sure what to make of his words. Does he really think I'm capable of something bigger? She had never considered herself the type of person to lead a company or build an empire. She was a single mom, working long shifts just to keep her head above water. She had dreams, sure, but they seemed so far out of reach. I don't know, she said quietly. I've got responsibilities. My daughter, my bills. It's hard to think about anything beyond getting through the day. Elon nodded, as if he understood. I get it, but sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when you least expect them. You don't have to figure everything out today. Just keep your mind open, and I'm sure you'll find your way. Jada felt a sudden wave of gratitude. She had never expected anyone, especially someone like Elon Musk, to show an interest in her potential, let alone suggest she could do something more. It wasn't the kind of recognition she had expected, but in that moment, it was the kind she needed. As she left the room, the night seemed to shift. The world outside felt a little different, less daunting, more open. Maybe, just maybe, she could make a change. Maybe it was time to stop just surviving and start dreaming again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Have you ever had someone push you to think bigger about your life? Sometimes, all it takes is one conversation to change everything. Stay tuned. There's more to this story. The night air outside the restaurant was cool, a welcome relief after the intensity of the past few hours. Jada stood on the sidewalk, waiting for the bus to take her home. Her mind was still racing with the conversation she had just had with Elon Musk. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Did that really just happen? She couldn't stop replaying his words in her mind. You could be doing more. You've got fire in your eyes. Why not aim higher? She glanced at her phone. Zoe's message still glowed on the screen. It was a grounding reminder of her reality. Zoe needed her. Jada couldn't just drop everything and chase some vague, big idea Elon had planted in her head. But what if there was more to her life than just surviving day to day? What if she could do something bigger? The bus arrived, and she climbed aboard, taking her usual seat by the window. The streets of the city passed by in a blur as Jada's thoughts continued to swirl. She had worked so hard for so long, keeping her head down and just making it through each day. The idea of doing something bigger felt almost impossible. But Elon had planted a seed. Maybe it was time to start watering it. When Jada arrived home, Zoe was already waiting by the door, her small face lighting up when she saw her mom. Mom, you're home. Zoe's voice was filled with excitement as she rushed to hug her. Jada smiled, bending down to pick her up. I'm home, baby. Did you have a good time at Grandma's? Zoe nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide. We made cookies. Grandma let me lick the spoon. And I drew a picture for you. Do you want to see it? Jada chuckled, her heart softening. I'd love to see it. As Zoe pulled out her crumpled drawing from her backpack, Jada felt a pang of guilt. Zoe deserves more than this, she thought. More than this tiny apartment. More than a mom who was barely holding it all together. More than the same routine, day after day. She hugged her daughter tightly, then glanced at the picture Zoe had drawn. Colorful, wild strokes on a sheet of paper, a mess of hearts and stars. It was her way of telling Jada that she was loved, even when things weren't perfect. Later that night, as Zoe slept soundly in her room, Jada sat on the couch, staring at her phone. She pulled up the restaurant's job board, scanning through a list of opportunities. She had never really looked before. had never felt like there was any point, but tonight felt different. What if she could start something new? Something outside of the narrow boundaries she'd created for herself? Her finger hovered over the search bar, and she hesitated. But what if I fail? What if I'm not cut out for something bigger? And then she remembered Elon's words. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when you least expect them. With a deep breath, she tapped Submit on a job application for a management position at a local tech startup, a company that prided itself on innovation and diversity. The application felt like a risk, like a huge leap into unknown territory, but it also felt right. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the thoughts sink in. It wasn't just about a new job or a career change. It was about changing the way she saw herself, stopping the cycle of self-doubt that had kept her trapped in the same place for so long. Maybe, just maybe, she could become more than she had ever dreamed. The next few days passed in a blur. Jada kept up with her shifts at the restaurant, but she couldn't stop thinking about the application she'd submitted. She started researching the company more, reading up on its values and the impact it had on the community. She felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Then, one evening, as she was clearing tables, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the message. Dear Jada, thank you for applying for the position of Operations Manager at Innovate Tech. After reviewing your application and experience, we would love to invite you for an interview next week. We believe your unique perspective could be a valuable asset to our team. Best regards, Sarah Thompson, HR Manager, Innovate Tech. Jada's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. I got the interview. A rush of excitement and anxiety flooded her. This was the moment. She could feel the weight of it in her chest. The opportunity to do something new, to change her life, to not just survive, but thrive. Her first instinct was to tell Zoe, to share the good news with her daughter, who had been her biggest motivation. But Jada hesitated for a moment. This was just the first step, and she didn't want to get too ahead of herself. She needed to prepare, to make sure she was ready for whatever came next. The interview was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Jada couldn't help but think about Elon. The brief encounter at the restaurant had shifted something in her. She still wasn't sure what it was, but it had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Jada spent the next few days researching everything she could about Innovate Tech, its values, its leaders, and the people who worked there. She knew this was her shot, and she was determined not to waste it. She practiced her answers to common interview questions, even rehearsed her story, how she had worked hard to get by, how she had always dreamed of something bigger but had never known how to make it happen. When the day of the interview arrived, Jada felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She put on her best outfit, something professional but still true to her style, and took a deep breath as she walked out the door. This was her chance to break free from the life she had known for so long. It was her chance to create a new path, not just for herself, but for Zoe as well. As Jada stepped onto the bus that would take her to Innovate Tech's office, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning a new chapter, one that would change everything. The morning of the interview, Jada woke up early, her nerves already running high. She had barely slept the night before, her mind spinning with doubts and excitement in equal measure. The bus ride to Innovate Tech felt like an eternity. Every bump and turn seemed to take her further away from the comfort of her usual life and closer to the unknown world she was about to step into. As she approached the building, she couldn't help but feel small. The sleek glass and steel exterior of Innovate Tech's headquarters loomed over her, its modern, minimalist design contrasting sharply with the worn, familiar streets of her neighborhood. The building seemed to pulse with energy, like a living entity full of possibilities. Is this really for me? Jada thought, feeling the familiar pang of self-doubt. But she took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. I deserve a chance. I'm not just here by accident. She entered the lobby, where a receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. Welcome to Innovate Tech. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here for an interview with Sarah Thompson, Jada said, trying to steady her nerves. Right this way, the receptionist replied, leading Jada down a long corridor lined with framed pictures of Innovate Tech's various projects and achievements. It felt like a different world. one Jada wasn't sure she belonged to, but that was exactly why she needed this. She needed to prove to herself that she could break out of the cycle she had been trapped in for so long. The interview room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the bustling city below. Sarah Thompson, the HR manager, was seated at the head of a polished conference table. She stood as Jada entered, offering a warm handshake and a smile that immediately put Jada at ease. "Jada, it's so nice to meet you," Sarah said, her voice friendly yet professional. "Please have a seat." Jada took a deep breath and sat down, trying to exude confidence despite the flurry of emotions swirling inside her. "Thank you for coming in today," Sarah continued. "We were really impressed by your application. Your experience in the service industry, especially managing teams, is exactly what we're looking for in someone to join our team here. But before we get into the specifics, I'd love to hear more about you. Tell me about yourself. What motivates you?" Jada paused, feeling the weight of the question. What motivates me? She thought about it for a moment. This is it. I can't just say what sounds good. I need to be real. "Well," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I'm a single mom. My daughter, Zoe, is my whole world. Everything I do is for her. I've been working in restaurants for years, always putting in the time, the effort, but I've been stuck. I've been working hard just to get by, not really thinking about what's next. But lately, I've realized that I can't keep living like this forever. I want more for Zoe, and I want more for myself. I want to stop surviving and start thriving. I know I have the drive and the skills to do something bigger, but I've never had the opportunity until now." Sarah nodded, clearly listening intently. "I appreciate your honesty, Jada. I can hear the passion in your voice, and that's exactly what we're looking for. It takes a lot of self-awareness and courage to step outside your comfort zone and reach for something more. You've clearly worked hard, and that's a value we hold dear here." Jada felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just a standard interview where they tried to squeeze out rehearsed answers. Sarah was actually listening. "Tell me a little more about your experience managing teams," Sarah asked, shifting the conversation to something more practical. "At Innovate Tech, we believe in empowering our team members, and we need someone who can step up and help guide others while maintaining a collaborative, positive work environment." Jada felt a flash of confidence. "I've managed teams in the restaurant industry for years, everything from training new servers to handling customer complaints to making sure we meet our goals. The environment can be tough, but I've always tried to foster a sense of teamwork. It's all about supporting each other and finding ways to make things work, no matter how stressful things get. I know that what we do in a restaurant is different from what you do here, but the core of it is the same. You need to lead by example, to listen to people, and to create an environment where people feel like they can succeed." Sarah smiled. "I like that. Leading by example is something we take seriously here. And being able to listen is an invaluable skill, especially when you're working with diverse teams in a fast-paced environment. We think you could be a great fit for our company." Jada's heart skipped a beat. Was she really hearing this? Sarah continued, "Now, there's one thing I want to make clear. Innovate Tech is a high-pressure environment. It's fast-paced, and we expect a lot from our team members. But we also believe in work-life balance, in providing the resources and support to help our people grow. I won't sugarcoat it. It's not always easy, but if you're the right person for the job, it can be incredibly rewarding." Jada nodded. "I understand. I've worked in fast-paced environments before, and I thrive under pressure. But I also know the importance of balance. I want to make sure that I'm not just giving my all at work, but also being there for my daughter. That's non-negotiable for me." Sarah looked at Jada thoughtfully for a moment before responding. "I respect that. Having a personal life outside of work is crucial, especially in a demanding job. I think you have the right mindset for this role, Jada." For a brief moment, everything around Jada seemed to slow down. Did she really just say that? Sarah continued, "We'll be in touch soon, but I just want to thank you for your time today. You're exactly the kind of person we're looking for." As Jada stood up to leave, she felt a wave of gratitude and excitement wash over her. She had done it. She had faced her fear and stepped into the unknown, and she had held her own. Walking out of Innovate Tech's building, Jada felt like a different person. The uncertainty that had clung to her like a shadow seemed to have lifted, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. The world, she realized, was full of opportunities, if only she was willing to take the first step. The days following the interview felt like a slow, endless crawl for Jada. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The questions, the answers, the way Sarah had seemed genuinely impressed by her experience and drive. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would race. Could it be? But each time, it wasn't the email she was hoping for. Jada tried to stay focused, continuing her shifts at the restaurant, but her mind was elsewhere. There were nights when she found herself staring blankly at customers, her thoughts consumed by the job interview. She had learned long ago that waiting for something important to happen often felt worse than the actual event itself. And the waiting was eating at her. Zoe seemed to notice her distraction, too. One afternoon, as Jada was scrolling through job listings online between shifts, her daughter came over and tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, are you okay?" Zoe asked, her big eyes full of concern. "You look sad." Jada smiled softly, brushing a strand of Zoe's hair out of her face. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just tired, you know? A lot of things on my mind." Zoe didn't seem convinced. She sat next to her mom on the couch and hugged her tightly, a simple, sweet gesture that made Jada's heart swell. She held Zoe close for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she was trying to do. The interviews, the dreams, the sacrifices she was making for Zoe's future. "Everything's going to be okay, right, Mom?" Zoe asked, her voice soft but earnest. Jada nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I hope so, baby. I really do." But even as she reassured Zoe, a nagging voice inside her whispered, "What if it's not? What if they don't call? What if I'm not good enough?" 3 days later, just as Jada was finishing her shift, she saw a new email pop up on her phone. Her hands shook slightly as she unlocked it, the anticipation nearly overwhelming. "Dear Jada, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We were impressed with your experience, passion, and the unique perspective you bring. We are pleased to offer you the position of Operations Manager at Innovate Tech. We believe you'll be a great addition to our team. We look forward to working with you. Best regards, Sarah Thompson, HR Manager, Innovate Tech." Jada's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, unsure whether the words on the screen were real. "I got it. I got the job." A surge of emotions overwhelmed her. Joy, relief, a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. And yet, mixed in with that elation was fear. What does this mean? Can I really handle this? Will it be everything I hope for? Or will it all come crashing down? "Mom, what is it?" Zoe's voice broke through her thoughts, and Jada looked up to find her daughter staring at her with wide, expectant eyes. "I got the job, Zoe," Jada said, her voice thick with emotion. "I got the job at Innovate Tech." Zoe's face lit up like a Christmas tree, and before Jada could say anything else, Zoe was bouncing around the living room, clapping her hands and jumping with excitement. "That's so awesome, Mom. You did it. You're going to be a boss." Zoe shouted, her joy infectious. Jada laughed, tears welling up in her eyes as she pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "I couldn't have done it without you, baby," Jada said, her voice catching in her throat. Zoe pulled back, looking at her with that same knowing look. "You've always been the boss, Mom. Now you're just gonna have a bigger office." Jada chuckled, but inside, she felt a mix of awe and uncertainty. Could she really do this? Could she leave behind the only world she'd ever known and step into something so vastly different? The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Jada had to wrap up things at the restaurant, her shifts, her last few customer interactions, and of course, her conversation with her manager. It felt surreal to be leaving the place that had supported her for so long, but at the same time, it felt like a weight was being lifted off her shoulders. On her last day at the restaurant, she stopped by the back office to check in with her manager, Tina. "Hey, Tina, got a minute?" Jada asked, knocking on the door before stepping inside. Tina looked up, a little surprised to see Jada standing there, her apron already off. "Jada, what's up?" "I just wanted to thank you for everything," Jada said, her voice sincere. "You gave me a chance when no one else would, and you taught me a lot over the years. I'm really grateful for that. Tina smiled warmly, setting down her clipboard. You've worked hard, Jada. I've seen you grow, and I'm proud of you. What's next for you? You leaving the restaurant for good? Jada nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. Yeah, I got a job offer at Innovate Tech, and I'm taking it. It's a big change, but it's time for me to move on. Tina's eyes widened. Wow, that's amazing, Jada. Congratulations. I knew you had it in you. You're gonna do great things. Jada smiled, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling up inside her. Thank you, Tina. I really appreciate everything you've done for me. As she left the restaurant for the last time, Jada felt a strange sense of closure. She wasn't just leaving a job, she was leaving behind an entire chapter of her life. It had been the place where she had struggled, grown, and fought for survival. But now, she was stepping into something new, a future she had once only dared to dream about. Her first day at Innovate Tech arrived faster than she had anticipated. Jada woke up early, dressed in a professional blouse and slacks, her hair neatly styled for the first time in weeks. She felt nervous, no, terrified, but also incredibly determined. Zoe was still sleeping as Jada kissed her on the forehead and slipped out the door. She knew this was just the beginning, but the weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. Walking through the glass doors of Innovate Tech, Jada felt an unfamiliar sense of purpose. The sleek, high-tech office environment was a stark contrast to the casual atmosphere of the restaurant. But it felt right. This was where she was supposed to be. Sarah Thompson greeted her in the lobby, her welcoming smile making Jada feel a little more at ease. Jada, welcome to Innovate Tech. We're so glad to have you on board. Let me show you around and introduce you to the team. As Jada followed Sarah through the halls, she felt a quiet excitement beginning to build. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, it felt full of potential. This was just the beginning of her journey, and no matter how many challenges lay ahead, Jada was ready to face them head-on. She had taken the leap. Now, it was time to soar. The sound of heels clicking on the polished floors of Innovate Tech's sleek, open-plan office filled the air as Jada walked through the halls, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was real. This was happening. No turning back now. Sarah Thompson led her to her new office, a space with large windows that looked out over the city, offering a stunning view of the skyline. The office was modern, with clean lines and minimalistic decor, but it was the view that took Jada's breath away. It felt like the world was at her feet, and for the first time in a long time, she could see a future that didn't feel restricted or confined by her past. This is your new space, Jada, Sarah said, smiling. It's not much now, but you'll be able to make it your own. Jada nodded, her words caught in her throat. She couldn't believe this was happening. Her office, her very own space. No more waiting tables, no more cleaning up after customers. She was stepping into a leadership role, a far cry from the days when she had struggled just to make ends meet. Sarah led her through the rest of the office, introducing her to the team. The energy was electric, a mix of young professionals, entrepreneurs, and innovators. People were busy, but not in a rushed, frantic way like in the restaurant industry. It was a different kind of energy, one that felt exciting and filled with possibilities. Jada's mind was buzzing as she tried to take it all in. Meet Max, Sarah said, introducing her to a tall, confident man in his late 20s. He's one of our lead project managers. Max extended his hand with a firm shake. Welcome to Innovate Tech, Jada. We're really glad to have you on board. Let me know if you need anything. Jada smiled, shaking his hand. Thanks, Max. I'm really looking forward to working with you. Sarah continued her tour, introducing Jada to more people. Each person seemed welcoming, but there was an unspoken understanding that this was a fast-paced environment. Everyone had their own tasks, their own responsibilities, and there was a clear expectation that Jada would need to hit the ground running. As the day went on, Jada found herself overwhelmed with information. There were systems to learn, processes to understand, and new faces to remember. But the more she absorbed, the more she realized how much she thrived in this kind of environment. In some ways, it reminded her of the restaurant industry, a place where things never stopped moving, where every decision mattered, and where teamwork was essential. Only here, the stakes were higher, and the challenges were different. The first few hours were a blur, but by lunchtime, Jada was starting to feel more at ease. Sarah invited her to lunch with a few of the other team members, and they all gathered around a table in the bright cafeteria. The conversation was light and casual, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere of her first day at the restaurant all those years ago. These people didn't feel like competitors or rivals. They felt like collaborators. "So, Jada," Max said, leaning in with a smile, "what do you think? How are you liking it so far?" "I'm honestly kind of blown away," Jada admitted, still processing everything. "It's so different from what I'm used to, but I like it. There's this energy here. It's contagious." Sarah smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. We thrive on innovation, and we expect a lot from our team. But we also make sure we support each other. You'll fit in perfectly." Jada felt a swell of pride. "I can do this," she thought. "This is where I belong." That afternoon, Jada was introduced to her direct supervisor, Clara, the director of operations. Clara was sharp, efficient, and had a no-nonsense attitude, but Jada could tell she was also a great mentor. Clara wasted no time in getting Jada up to speed on her role, explaining the various projects she would be overseeing and the goals for the next quarter. "I know this is a lot to take in," Clara said, her tone direct but understanding. "But you've been brought in because we know you can handle it. We need someone who can keep things running smoothly, who can make decisions on the fly, and who won't back down when things get tough. That's why we chose you." Jada's stomach fluttered with a mix of excitement and nerves. "This is it," she thought. "I'm here because they believe in me." Over the next few hours, Clara walked her through several ongoing projects, outlining key deadlines, challenges, and the expectations the team had for Jada. The learning curve was steep, but Jada had always been a quick learner. As she dug into the details, she found herself intrigued, eager to dive deeper into each task. By the end of the day, Jada was exhausted, her mind spinning with new information. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from growth, from stepping into a role that challenged her and pushed her boundaries. As she walked out of the office at the end of her first day, Jada felt like a different person. She had made it through her first day, and not only that, she had thrived. The sense of imposter syndrome that had loomed over her since she first stepped into Innovate Tech was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. But it was quieter now, more manageable. She knew she had earned this position, and no matter how much she doubted herself, she would prove to herself and everyone else that she belonged here. When she got home that evening, Zoe was already waiting for her, sitting on the couch with a coloring book in her lap. "How was your first day, Mom?" Zoe asked, looking up from her drawing. "It was amazing, sweetie," Jada replied, setting her bag down and sitting next to her. "I learned so much. I think I'm really going to like it there." Zoe grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I knew you would. You're the smartest mom ever." Jada chuckled, her heart swelling with love. "I'm trying, kiddo. I'm really trying." That night, as she prepared for bed, Jada found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had taken a chance, a big one, and it had paid off. But this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, and she knew there would be times when she'd feel overwhelmed, when she questioned her decision. But she also knew something else. She wasn't alone. She had Zoe, she had the support of the team at Innovate Tech, and most importantly, she had herself. She had the courage to take that leap, to step into the unknown, and to keep going even when the future seemed uncertain. Jada's second week at Innovate Tech was a blur of meetings, emails, and endless to-do lists. Her initial excitement was still there, but now it had morphed into a palpable pressure to prove herself. Each day, she found herself diving deeper into her responsibilities, learning the ropes, and gradually understanding the complexities of her new role. Clara, her direct supervisor, had been a steady guide, offering advice when needed, but also pushing her to step up and take ownership of her projects. Jada appreciated Clara's no-nonsense approach. It felt familiar, like the tough love she had often received from the restaurant managers she had worked with over the years. But here, the stakes were different. The work was more abstract, the people she was managing were highly skilled professionals, and the problems she had to solve were more complex. There was no, "Wait a minute, I'll get to that after I serve this table moment. There was no escaping the pressure. By the end of the week, Jada had already encountered a few roadblocks. One of the key software systems the team used had crashed during a critical presentation, and she was tasked with figuring out a solution. She spent hours troubleshooting with the IT department, trying to restore the system, all while keeping the rest of the team on track. By the time the issue was resolved, Jada was drained, her confidence shaken. That night, after another long day, Jada sat at her kitchen table, going over her notes, when Zoe wandered in, holding a small piece of paper. "Mom, I made you something," Zoe said, her wide grin lighting up the room. Jada smiled wearily, setting her work aside. "What is it, sweetheart?" Zoe handed her the paper, which had been folded into a little card. On it was a drawing of a woman in a suit, standing next to a tall, shiny building. There was a speech bubble that said, "You did it, Mom." Below the woman, Zoe had drawn a heart and a smiley face. Jada felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the drawing. Zoe's innocent belief in her strength, in her ability to succeed, made the weight of the day feel a little lighter. "Thank you, baby," Jada said, pulling Zoe into a hug. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Zoe looked up at her, her expression serious for someone so young. "I know you can do it, Mom. You always do. You just have to keep trying." Jada chuckled, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "You're right. I do. And I'll keep trying." The next morning, Jada woke up with a new sense of determination. Zoe's drawing had given her a fresh burst of energy. "I'm doing this for her," Jada reminded herself. "I can't back down now." The following Monday was critical. Clara had informed her that Innovate Tech had a new project proposal they were presenting to a potential partner. Jada was tasked with managing the project details and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She was feeling the weight of the responsibility, but there was a fire in her gut. This was her chance to prove that she belonged in this new world. The day was filled with meetings, strategy sessions, progress updates, and discussions on logistics. Jada spent hours coordinating with different departments, making sure all the details were aligned. The pressure mounted as the hours passed. She was working with high-level executives now, not just her team, and the magnitude of what she was doing started to hit her. By the time the presentation was ready, Jada was mentally exhausted. The room was set up, the team gathered, and the client arrived. She had barely eaten, and the nervous energy coursing through her was making her stomach churn, but she couldn't afford to falter. As the meeting began, Clara introduced Jada, signaling her to take over the project portion. Jada stood, her hands shaking slightly, but she forced herself to focus. She cleared her throat and began presenting. "As you know," Jada started, her voice steady despite the nerves, "this project represents a huge opportunity for Innovate Tech. We're not just offering a product, we're offering a solution, one that can change the way your team works and boost your efficiency." She could see the clients in the room, their eyes on her, watching every move she made. She took a deep breath and kept going. The numbers, the projections, the timeline. She delivered it all with the confidence she had only begun to find within herself. She knew this project, inside and out. She had spent hours perfecting every detail. As she wrapped up, Jada glanced at Clara, who gave her a small, approving nod. The meeting wasn't over yet, but Jada felt a flicker of pride in herself. She had done it. She had taken charge, stepped up, and delivered. Something she'd never thought she could do in such a high-pressure environment. The meeting ended successfully, and the clients left, satisfied with the proposal. Jada exhaled, her body tense with the aftershocks of the presentation. She sank into her chair in the conference room, her pulse still racing. Clara walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did great, Jada. You nailed it," Clara said, her smile wide and genuine. Jada looked up at her, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thanks. I was really nervous, but I think it went well." "It definitely did," Clara replied. "This is just the beginning. You've got a lot more challenges coming your way, but I have no doubt you're ready for them." Jada's heart swelled. She had done it. She had faced the challenge head-on, and not only had she survived, it felt like she had succeeded. That night, as Jada got home, she was exhausted but elated. She shared the news with Zoe, who jumped up from her coloring book and threw her arms around her. "I knew you could do it, Mom. You're the best." Jada laughed, hugging her tight. "You were right, baby. I just had to keep trying." Later that evening, as Jada lay in bed, her mind buzzed with the events of the day. The pressure, the success, the feeling of growth. For the first time since she'd started at Innovate Tech, she truly felt like she was part of something bigger. She wasn't just playing catch-up. She was moving forward, stepping into the role that was meant for her. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized one important thing. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would still be full of challenges, but Jada knew she was ready. She had faced doubt, fear, and uncertainty, and had come out stronger on the other side. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. Jada woke up the next morning feeling the lingering effects of her victory, but with a new weight on her shoulders. She had succeeded in the presentation. She had stepped up, and that felt like a huge win. But as the days passed, she realized that this success was just a single milestone on a much longer, unpredictable path. There was still so much left to prove, and she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. As she sat at her desk, her laptop open, Jada reviewed the list of tasks for the week ahead. There was a new deadline fast approaching, and Clara had already emphasized how critical it was to stay on track. The work was piling up, and she could feel the pressure mounting. Innovate Tech had high expectations, and while that kept her sharp, it also kept her constantly on edge. But this time, the pressure wasn't just coming from Clara or the project itself, it was coming from within. "I've got this," Jada muttered to herself, trying to quell the rising anxiety. "I've handled worse. I'm not going to let this overwhelm me." That's when her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "We need to meet in the conference room ASAP. Urgent." Jada's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what this was about, but given the tone of the message, she knew it wasn't good news. Quickly, she stood, grabbed her notebook, and headed toward the conference room, her mind racing with possibilities. When Jada entered the conference room, Clara and Max were already seated at the long table, a serious look on both of their faces. The moment Jada walked in, Clara motioned for her to sit. "Jada, we've encountered a problem," Clara said, cutting straight to the point. "One of our major clients, Nextech, is unhappy with the progress on the project we've been managing for them. They've expressed serious concerns about the timeline and deliverables, and they're threatening to pull out if we don't make some immediate changes." Jada's stomach dropped. Nextech was one of Innovate Tech's biggest accounts. Losing them would be a blow, not just financially, but to the company's reputation. The team had been working on this project for months, and while Jada had only recently come on board, she felt responsible. She was the point of contact now. Clara continued, her voice tense. "This is where you come in. We need a plan, and we need it fast. Max and I have already identified the key issues, but we're going to need your expertise to make sure we meet the expectations. I want you to take charge of this, Jada. We're counting on you." Jada nodded, her mind racing. "This is it. This is my moment to prove I can handle the heat." "I'll get right on it," Jada said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, emails, and strategy sessions. Jada met with the project managers, the technical team, and the client services team to figure out exactly where things had gone wrong. There had been delays in the development phase, and communication issues had created a rift between Innovate Tech and Nextech. Everyone had their own version of the story, but the bottom line was clear. Time was running out. Jada knew that if she didn't act quickly and decisively, the company could lose the Nextech account. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she was determined not to back down. She put together a new timeline, suggested adjustments to the project scope, and reached out to the Nextech representatives to set up an emergency meeting. When the call with Nextech was scheduled for the following day, Jada felt the nerves creeping in again. This wasn't just another presentation. It was a high-stakes conversation that could determine the future of the company's relationship with one of its most valuable clients. She knew that any mistake, any misstep, could cost Innovate Tech everything. That night, she stayed late at the office, reviewing every detail of the project. Her eyes were tired, and her mind was overloaded with information, but she couldn't afford to take a break. She had to make sure she had everything ready for the meeting tomorrow. The following day, Jada stood in front of the conference table, a glass of water in hand, waiting for the video call with Nextech to begin. She took a deep breath and glanced around the room. Clara and Max sat in the back, both watching her closely. This was her moment. The video call connected, and Jada's heart skipped a beat as she saw the faces of the Nextech executives on the screen. There was no turning back now. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Jada began, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting inside her. "Thank you for taking the time to meet today. I know there have been concerns about the project's progress, and I want to address them head-on." One of the executives, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, spoke up. "We're running out of patience, Ms. Parker. We've been more than generous with the timeline, but the delays are unacceptable. If we don't see significant improvement immediately, we'll have no choice but to end our partnership." Jada nodded, taking a deep breath. "I completely understand your frustration, and I take full responsibility for the delays. We've had some internal miscommunication and unexpected issues, but I assure you, we are committed to resolving this and getting back on track." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Here's the revised plan," Jada continued, projecting the updated timeline on the screen. "We've made some adjustments to the scope of work, and I'm personally overseeing all aspects of the project from now on. We'll be providing you with weekly updates to ensure we're meeting your expectations, and if anything changes, you'll know about it immediately." The Nextech executives exchanged glances, the tension in the room palpable. But Jada didn't flinch. She kept her eyes focused on the screen, waiting for a response. Finally, the man who had spoken earlier broke the silence. "I'll admit, Ms. Parker, we're not thrilled about the delays, but your commitment to resolving the issues is noted. We'll give you another chance, but you need to deliver. I want to see real progress within the next 2 weeks." Jada nodded, relieved but not yet satisfied. "Thank you. I won't let you down. We'll meet those expectations." As the call ended, Jada exhaled deeply, the weight of the conversation still heavy on her chest. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a reprieve. Innovate Tech still had a chance to salvage the relationship with Nextech, but it would take all of Jada's focus, skill, and determination to make that happen. When the call was over, Jada turned to Clara and Max. "We've got 2 weeks to turn this around," she said, her voice firm. "But I know we can do it. We'll work together and make this happen." Clara gave her a small smile. "You handled that well, Jada. It's not an easy situation, but I think you've earned their trust." Jada smiled, but the sense of urgency didn't leave her. "It's just the beginning. Now we've got to put in the work." As she walked back to her desk, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come in such a short amount of time. She had gone from a waitress facing an uncertain future to the one who was now standing between Innovate Tech and a potentially disastrous situation. The challenges were growing steeper, but so was her resolve. For the first time in her life, Jada truly believed that she could overcome anything. This wasn't just a job. It was her chance to prove to herself and everyone around her that she had the strength, the skill, and the heart to succeed. And she wasn't about to let it slip away. The next 2 weeks felt like a blur of meetings, updates, and intense focus. Jada threw herself into the Nextech project with everything she had. The weight of the responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders, but with each passing day, she became more determined to succeed. Every email she sent, every call she made, felt like a small victory, a step closer to proving she belonged at Innovate Tech, and that she was more than just the waitress who had stumbled into the corporate world. Jada's team rallied behind her, and Clara's support remained unwavering. Max, though, was a different story. He was the kind of person who expected perfection and was quick to point out any slip-ups. Jada had learned early on to keep her guard up around him, but she also recognized his expertise. Still, there was a tension between them that she couldn't ignore. He was tough on her, often pushing her to go beyond what was asked, which, in some ways, motivated her. But other times, it felt like he was testing her, pushing her to the edge, just to see if she'd break. Despite the pressure, Jada found herself growing more confident. Her meetings with Nextech were productive, and though there were still challenges to navigate, the project was progressing. The feedback from the client had improved, and for the first time since she'd taken charge, Jada felt like she was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But just as everything seemed to be settling down, an unexpected storm rolled in. It started with an email from Clara on a Thursday afternoon. Jada, we need to talk. Can you meet in the conference room at 3 p.m.? Jada's stomach churned as she read the message. Clara's tone was unusually formal, and the use of "we need to talk" immediately put her on edge. Had something gone wrong with Nextech? She wondered. Was there a new issue? The clock seemed to tick louder as she made her way to the conference room. Every step felt like a countdown to something she wasn't prepared for. When Jada entered the room, Clara was seated at the table, her arms crossed, her expression serious. Max was already there, as well as another unfamiliar face. A woman in a sharp suit, her posture rigid and professional. Jada, this is Rachel, our head of legal affairs, Clara said, introducing the woman with a curt nod. Rachel, this is Jada Parker, the project lead on Nextech. Jada shook Rachel's hand, her mind already racing. Legal affairs? What is this about? Clara wasted no time. Jada, we've run into a problem. Nextech has filed a formal complaint. They're accusing us of breaching the contract in several areas, including failure to meet key milestones and communication breakdowns. They're threatening legal action if we don't resolve these issues immediately. Jada's heart sank. This was not what she had expected. Legal action? What exactly are they accusing us of? Jada asked, trying to steady her voice. Rachel, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Nextech claims we missed critical deadlines, that we did not deliver on agreed-upon features, and that they were misled about our capacity to meet their needs. They've gathered evidence, and their legal team is already drafting a formal complaint. They're giving us a very short window to respond. Jada felt the room spinning. How had this happened? She had been on top of the project. She had worked tirelessly to meet every deadline, every expectation. But somewhere along the way, something had slipped through the cracks. Clara turned to her. We need to take immediate action to address this. I want you to work with Rachel and Max to analyze the situation and prepare a defense. We're going to need all hands on deck to avoid this escalating into something bigger. Jada nodded, but inside, her mind was reeling. This was a nightmare. The very project she had been working so hard to save now seemed like it was on the verge of falling apart completely, and the threat of legal action only added to the already overwhelming pressure she was facing. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Jada and the team dove into the details of Nextech's complaint, poring over contracts, email exchanges, and project timelines. The more they examined the documents, the clearer it became that Nextech's accusations were rooted in misunderstandings and communication breakdowns. It wasn't a deliberate breach of contract, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that Nextech had a solid case, and the company was now in damage control mode. Jada spent the evening going over every detail with Max and Rachel. They worked late into the night, crafting a response that would hopefully calm the situation. Rachel provided legal guidance on how to navigate the breach of contract accusations, while Max helped Jada break down the technical side of things. Jada knew the project inside and out, but this was different. This was no longer just about delivering a product on time. It was about protecting the company's reputation. By the time Jada finally left the office that night, it was after midnight. Her head was pounding, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. But as she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over yet. Nextech wasn't the only hurdle she had to face. There was something else lingering in the background. Something bigger. The next day, Clara called Jada into her office. Jada, we've received another call, Clara said, her voice tense. It's from Elon Musk. Jada froze. Elon Musk? What could he possibly want with me? Clara continued. He wants to meet with you. He's heard about the situation with Nextech and wants to discuss it. Apparently, he has some thoughts on how to handle this. Jada's heart raced. She had heard of Musk, of course, everyone had, but to be in a position where she was going to meet with him? That felt surreal. Are you serious? Jada asked, trying to process the information. Clara nodded. Yes, it's happening. You need to be ready. We're not sure what his angle is, but if he's getting involved, this could go in any direction. We need to be prepared for anything. Jada's mind spun as she left Clara's office. How could Elon Musk have gotten involved in this? Was this just a random encounter, or was there something more behind it? She had no idea, but one thing was certain. The pressure was about to reach a whole new level. With just a few hours to prepare for a meeting with one of the most influential men in the world, Jada knew she had to be ready for whatever was coming. She took a deep breath as she sat at her desk. This wasn't just about Next Tech anymore. This was about something bigger, something that could change the course of her career. And she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. Jada could hardly believe it as she walked into the sleek, ultramodern conference room at Innovate Tech's headquarters. Her palms were sweaty, her mind was racing, and her heart was pounding in her chest. Elon Musk, the man whose name was synonymous with billion-dollar ideas, innovation, and ambition, was about to sit across from her. She'd heard the stories, of course. Musk was known for his directness, his unpredictable nature, and his demanding standards. In many ways, he was a genius, but he also had a reputation for being intimidating, and sometimes even harsh. What if I mess this up? Jada thought. What if I can't keep it together? But this wasn't just about meeting him. It was about saving Innovate Tech's reputation and her own. If she couldn't impress him, this could be her last chance in this world she'd only recently entered. It was the kind of pressure that could crush a person or propel them to new heights. Jada took a deep breath and adjusted her blouse. She had no choice but to dive in headfirst. The door opened, and in walked Elon Musk. He was taller than she expected, dressed in a black t-shirt and jeans, his face unreadable, his presence immediately commanding the room. Behind him was a small entourage of assistants, but he waved them off, giving Jada his full attention. Jada Parker, right? Musk's voice was calm, measured. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. Yes, Mr. Musk, Jada replied, standing up to greet him, her voice steady despite the nerves threatening to rise to the surface. It's an honor to meet you. He nodded briefly. Let's get to it. I've been following the Next Tech situation. Clara mentioned you're leading the charge. So, tell me, what went wrong and why should I believe you can fix it? Jada swallowed, the weight of the question settling over her. What went wrong? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? She had already spent countless hours dissecting the project, but this wasn't just about the technicalities. This was about credibility, her credibility. The pressure felt unbearable, but she knew this was her moment. I'll be blunt with you, Mr. Musk, Jada began, choosing her words carefully. There were several missteps along the way, communication issues, unexpected delays, and some internal mismanagement that led to the breach of deadlines. But this is a situation we can still resolve. Next Tech is still on board, and I've already restructured the timeline and adjusted the scope of work to meet their expectations. We've been making progress, but it's going to take more work, and we need to act fast. Musk didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, staring at her, his face inscrutable. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Jada tried to hold his gaze, but she could feel the pressure mounting with every second. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. You've been working on this for how long now? Just under 6 months, Jada replied. He nodded. In my experience, when something starts going wrong this early in the game, it's usually a sign that the foundation was weak to begin with. So, you're saying that you can turn things around now? Jada hesitated. It was a question she had asked herself 100 times in the last few weeks. Could she really fix this? Could she save the project, and more importantly, her career? Yes, she said, her voice firm, though her insides were churning. I can. I've already put in place a new communication strategy, reorganized the teams, and I'm taking full responsibility for the project from here on out. I'll make sure we deliver on the revised timeline. You have my word. Musk leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. You seem confident, he said, his tone cool. But confidence isn't enough. How are you going to prove that you're the right person for this job? Jada's mind raced. She had to convince him. There was no other option. I understand how high the stakes are, she said, her voice steady despite the growing tension. I've been where you are, fighting to keep things afloat when everything seems to be falling apart. I know what it's like to feel like you're the last person standing between success and failure. But that's why I'm the right person for this. I don't run from challenges. I face them head-on, and I find a way to win. I've been working day and night to make sure we deliver on what we promised Next Tech. I won't stop until we get it right. Musk didn't react immediately. Instead, he sat there, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Jada's heart pounded in her chest. Was he buying it? Finally, he broke the silence. "All right," he said, his voice still calm but with a hint of approval. "I like your fire. But here's the thing. I don't care about the technicalities. I care about results. You're going to have to show me that you can pull this off, and fast. If Nextech doesn't see results in 2 weeks, I'll be looking elsewhere. No more second chances." Jada's heart skipped a beat. 2 weeks? That was barely enough time to fix the issues, let alone deliver on everything they promised. But she didn't let the panic show. "I understand," Jada replied. "We'll meet that deadline." Musk stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "Good. I'll be watching. Keep me updated. You've got your shot. Don't screw it up." As he walked out of the room, Jada exhaled, her legs feeling weak. 2 weeks. It felt like a lifetime, and yet it was nothing. In the span of those 14 days, everything would be decided. Her future, her career at Innovate Tech, and the very survival of the next tech project, all rested on her shoulders. Jada left the meeting with mixed emotions. On the one hand, she had just survived a conversation with one of the most powerful men in tech, something that should have felt like a monumental achievement. On the other, she was now under a clock, racing against a ticking bomb. She had no time to waste. When she walked back into her office, Clara was waiting for her, eyes expectant. "Well?" Clara asked. Jada took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "He's given us 2 weeks. If Nextech isn't satisfied with our progress by then, we're done." Clara nodded, her expression serious. "All right, let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were nothing short of grueling. Jada spent every waking hour working on the Nextech project, overseeing the implementation of new timelines, and checking in with the teams regularly to make sure everything was on track. She pushed herself harder than she had ever pushed before. More than the hours of sleepless nights, the stress, or the constant pressure, it was her pride on the line. She wasn't just fighting for the project anymore. She was fighting for everything she had worked for. It was a race against time, and there was no room for error. As the deadline loomed closer, Jada had no idea whether or not she would succeed. But one thing was certain. She wasn't about to give up. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Jada hardly slept, often working well past midnight, her eyes bloodshot from staring at the screen for too long. The weight of Elon Musk's ultimatum loomed over her every waking moment. The clock was ticking, every hour, every minute mattered now. But despite the overwhelming pressure, she knew she couldn't afford to crack. The first few days after the meeting with Musk were filled with frantic energy. Jada threw herself into her work with a laser focus, reorganizing her team, reassigning roles, and relentlessly troubleshooting the issues that had plagued the Nextech project from the start. Max, while still demanding, seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. He gave her space to lead, though his critical eye was never far behind. Meanwhile, Clara became her sounding board, her constant ally. Every new challenge that arose, they tackled it together. Clara was a steadying force in the chaos, calm, collected, and pragmatic. She was one of the few people Jada could rely on in this storm. By the end of the first week, things were looking better. Nextech's legal team had reviewed the proposed adjustments to the project timeline, and they seemed to be on board with the new direction. Jada had received a few tentative green lights, and that small bit of progress fueled her determination. But the stakes remained high. Elon Musk's 2-week deadline still loomed large. One afternoon, as Jada sat in a tense meeting with the Nextech team to finalize some of the technical details, her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "Elon wants an update. ASAP." Jada's stomach churned. The pressure was starting to build again. She quickly excused herself from the meeting, finding an empty conference room where she could compose herself before calling Clara back. "Jada," Clara's voice crackled through the phone. "Elon is asking for an update on the project's status. He wants specifics. He wants to know where we stand right now and what we're doing to ensure we meet the deadline. You have to prepare a report." "Wait, a full report? What exactly does he want?" Jada asked, her heart racing. Clara hesitated, then spoke carefully. "He wants to see the numbers, the milestones, the deliverables. He wants to know we're not just spinning our wheels here. He's serious about this. Jada took a deep breath. This was it. This would be her chance to prove she was on top of everything. If she couldn't show Elon the tangible progress they had made, she knew he'd pull the plug on the project and possibly her career at Innovate Tech. "I'll get it done," she replied, her voice steady. "Thanks, Clara." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Jada worked feverishly to compile data, timelines, and deliverables. She reviewed every email, every message from the Next Tech team. She double-checked the numbers, ensuring that everything was up-to-date and accurate. With the weight of Elon Musk's expectations hanging over her, she knew this wasn't just another progress report. It was the make-or-break moment. By the time she was ready to send the report, her fingers were numb from typing, but she didn't hesitate. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, trying to catch her breath. An hour later, Jada's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Clara. "Elon's read it. He wants a face-to-face meeting tomorrow afternoon. Get ready. He's not giving you much time." Jada felt her pulse quicken. A meeting? She had no idea what to expect, especially after the intense scrutiny he'd placed on her report. Was he satisfied? Or was he about to tear it apart? She spent the rest of the night preparing. Jada reviewed every single detail of her report, every step of the project. She made sure she could explain every decision she'd made, every adjustment she'd implemented. There could be no room for error this time, not with Elon Musk watching her every move. The next afternoon, Jada stood in front of the same conference room where she'd met Elon just 2 weeks ago. Her palms were clammy, her stomach in knots. This was it, the moment that could change everything. When the door opened, Jada was met with the same presence that had left her breathless the first time. Elon Musk entered the room with his usual briskness, followed by his team, though this time there were fewer people with him, just a couple of his top advisors. "Jada," he said with a curt nod, his eyes sharp, scanning her. "Let's get straight to it. How are we looking?" Jada nodded and stepped forward, opening her laptop to present her updated report. "Mr. Musk, as requested, here's a breakdown of the adjustments we've made. We've restructured the timeline to meet Next Tech's new requirements, and I've ensured that all critical milestones are now back on track. We've also implemented a new communication plan to address the breakdowns that occurred earlier. We're meeting our targets, and if everything continues as planned, we'll be ready by the deadline." Musk sat down across from her, his gaze never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask a single question as she went through the report. Jada could feel his scrutiny like a physical weight. The minutes stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. When she finally finished, there was a long, tense silence. Jada held her breath, waiting for his response. "Well," Musk finally said, his tone neutral, "you've certainly put in the work. The numbers look solid, but numbers don't always tell the full story. Can you guarantee this will be done on time? Because if it's not, we'll be walking away. No second chances." Jada's heart raced. This is it, the moment of truth. "I can guarantee it," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've taken every step necessary to ensure that we deliver as promised. There won't be any more delays, and the team is fully committed. I'll make sure of it." Musk studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right, Jada, you've got my attention. If you can deliver, you'll earn more than just my respect. But if you don't," he let the sentence hang in the air. Jada's pulse pounded in her ears. There was no turning back now. She couldn't fail. "I won't fail," she said firmly. Musk gave her a small, approving nod, then stood. "I'll check in again in a week. Keep me posted." With that, he turned and walked out of the room. Jada exhaled slowly, her heart still hammering in her chest. 1 week. It was still a race against time, but now she had Elon Musk's approval, or at least his attention. She couldn't afford to let up now, not when the finish line was so close. As Jada sat alone in the conference room, staring at the closed door, a single thought ran through her mind. "I can do this. I will do this." But the question remained. Could she really pull off the impossible? The next 7 days were a blur of endless meetings, late-night revisions, and constant check-ins. Jada didn't have the luxury of downtime, not now. Every hour felt like it was being counted against her, and with Elon Musk's deadline hanging over her like a dark cloud, she knew there was no room for error. The clock was ticking, and with every passing day, the pressure seemed to build higher. The next tech project had been riddled with problems from the start, but Jada had made significant strides in getting things back on track. Communication had improved, the development team was working at full capacity, and the new timeline she presented was actually looking feasible. She was almost there. But there was still that gnawing fear inside her. What if it wasn't enough? What if the clock ran out before she could prove herself? By the end of the week, Jada had managed to implement all the adjustments she had promised Musk. Every department was in sync, every member of her team fully aware of their responsibilities. The tasks that had previously seemed insurmountable were now inching closer to completion, and Nextech's team was cautiously optimistic. Yet, the real test was still ahead. Elon Musk would be reviewing everything again. The final meeting would determine whether all the hard work would pay off or crash down in a heap of failure. But something had shifted during the last few days. Jada had gone from being constantly worried about the outcome to finding a new kind of resolve. She could see the progress, could feel it, too. This wasn't just about salvaging a project anymore. It was about proving to herself, and to everyone who doubted her, that she was more than capable of handling the pressure. In a quiet moment, as she sat at her desk with the project report open in front of her, she thought back to everything that had led her here. Her early days at Innovate Tech, working as an assistant, watching others climb the corporate ladder while she waited for her turn. Her encounter with Elon Musk. The misunderstanding at the luxury restaurant. The insult that had, in many ways, sparked this journey. It was as if everything had come full circle. She could almost hear her mom's voice in her head. "You're stronger than you think, Jada. Don't let anyone tell you you can't make it. You've got this." The final meeting with Musk was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day. It was going to be the most important moment of Jada's career so far, and the thought of it sent a ripple of nervous energy through her body. As she sat in her office, preparing for the meeting, Max walked in. His presence was always a mix of authority and quiet intensity, and today, it seemed like he could sense the tension in the air. "You ready for tomorrow?" Max asked, his eyes scanning the piles of reports and notes on her desk. "I think so," Jada replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She'd spent hours making sure every detail was perfect. "This has to work, Jada. You've come too far to fail now." Max nodded. "You've done well. But remember, Musk doesn't care about the process. He wants results. You've got to be ready to show him exactly what he wants to see. No fluff. No excuses." Jada nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Max was right. This meeting was going to be a make-or-break moment. She could feel the pressure mounting. "I'll be ready," she said, trying to sound assured. He gave her a reassuring nod and turned to leave, but then paused at the door. "And Jada?" She looked up at him, his face more serious than usual. "Don't forget, it's not just about proving to Musk that you're capable. You've already done that. Now, it's about proving to yourself that you're worth the seat at the table." Jada stared after him, his words sinking in. This wasn't just about impressing Musk. It was about proving to herself that she belonged here, that all the hard work, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt had been worth it. She had already come so far. She couldn't stop now. The next day, as Jada entered the sleek boardroom for the final meeting, the weight of everything hit her like a wave. The room was more intense than she had anticipated. Elon Musk was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by his trusted advisors. His gaze was steady, but there was no warmth in his eyes. This was business, and he wasn't here for pleasantries. Jada's heart pounded in her chest as she sat down across from him, carefully arranging the reports and data on the table in front of her. She glanced around the room. Nextech's legal team was present, as well as a few senior members from Innovate Tech. "Jada," Musk said, breaking the silence as he eyed her. "Let's get straight to it. What's the status?" Jada took a deep breath and launched into her presentation. She was prepared, her hands steady, her mind sharp. She outlined the adjustments she'd made to the timeline, the improvements in communication, and the new deliverables she'd set for the team. Every number, every detail was accounted for. There was no room for error. As she finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. Musk, still unreadable, glanced at the documents in front of him, then back at Jada. "You say the project is back on track, but I need to hear it from you," Musk said. His tone was matter of fact, but there was an edge to it. "Can you guarantee that Nextech will be satisfied, that this will be completed on time and without any further setbacks?" Jada swallowed hard. The moment of truth. This wasn't just about numbers or charts. It was about trust. About convincing Musk that she had what it took to make this work. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse was racing. "I can guarantee that the project will be completed on time. The new structure is in place, and I'm personally overseeing every step. There won't be any more setbacks. You have my word." Musk studied her for what felt like an eternity. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, finally, he leaned back in his chair, nodding slightly. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. You've made progress, and that's something. But let's see if you can deliver. If you do, this project could become something big." Jada held her breath, waiting for his final verdict. "If Nextech is satisfied with the final results," Musk continued, his voice flat, "you'll have earned my respect. But you have one shot. Get it right." Jada nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest. "I will." As the meeting wrapped up and everyone began to file out of the room, Jada felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Musk hadn't given her a guaranteed yes, but it wasn't a rejection either. She still had a chance. This was her moment, and no matter what it took, she was going to make it count. The days following the meeting with Elon Musk were a blur of high-stakes decision-making and nonstop work. The weight of the promise Jada had made to Musk weighed heavily on her. The deadline was fast approaching, and despite all the progress, there were still so many hurdles to clear. Nextech's legal team had its own concerns. The developers were pushing against their limits, and Jada could feel the strain of everything coming to a head. Her team, once filled with hope and determination, was now starting to show signs of exhaustion. The long hours, the constant pressure, it was beginning to take its toll. Even Clara, her unwavering ally, looked tired. But Jada couldn't afford to rest. Every day felt like an uphill battle, each task more daunting than the last. She could feel the eyes of the entire company on her. Nextech, Innovate Tech, and even Elon Musk himself. One mistake, one slip-up, and it could all unravel. It was late one night when Jada was huddled in her office, her fingers stiff from typing, when the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her she couldn't ignore it. She picked up the receiver. "Jada Davis," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into her body. "Jada, it's Clara," came the voice on the other end, shaky and urgent. "I need you to come down to the server room. Now." Jada's heart skipped a beat. Clara never called her at this hour, especially with such a frantic tone. "What happened?" Jada asked, her voice tight. "It's bad. Really bad. We've hit a major roadblock. I don't know how we're going to fix this in time." Clara's voice trembled with panic. "On my way," Jada said, snapping into action. She grabbed her coat and rushed out of the office, the halls of the Innovate Tech building eerily quiet at this hour. She felt the familiar, anxious knot tighten in her stomach. When Jada arrived in the server room, the sight before her made her blood run cold. Clara was standing by a massive server rack, furiously typing on a keyboard, her face pale. Several other team members were gathered around, their faces grim as they tried to diagnose the issue. "What's going on?" Jada demanded, approaching Clara. "It's a database corruption," Clara said, her voice strained. "All the recent updates we made, everything from the past 48 hours, it's gone. Completely wiped out." Jada's stomach dropped. The timeline was already tight as it was. Losing this much data could set them back days, maybe even weeks. "Are you sure?" Jada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her hands shaking as she pulled up error logs on the screen. "I've tried everything, recovery programs, backups, but nothing's working. We need to recover the lost data. If we don't, we'll miss the deadline." Jada's mind raced. How could this happen? They had been so careful about data security, so meticulous. But the reality was clear now. This was a crisis. Okay, Jada said, trying to keep her composure. What's the next step? We can't just sit here. Clara glanced up at her, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and frustration. There's one chance left, a specialized recovery system, but it'll take hours to run. We won't know if it works until the morning. Jada could feel her pulse quicken. Time was something they no longer had. If the system failed, it would mean starting from scratch. And there was no time for that. Run it, Jada said firmly. We don't have a choice. The next few hours were a blur of tense waiting. Jada paced back and forth, watching the recovery process unfold on the screen. Every minute felt like a century. She glanced at Clara, who was silently praying that the recovery system would work. The other team members huddled in silence, exhausted but determined. When the progress bar finally reached 100%, Clara clicked the final button. For a moment, no one said anything. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the servers. And then the screen flickered to life, showing a message, "Data recovery complete." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The data was back. Jada felt a rush of adrenaline surge through her veins. But even as the crisis was averted, she knew the battle wasn't over. There was still so much to do. The project wasn't fixed, it was patched. All right, Jada said, shaking off the weight of the moment. We've got work to do. Let's get back to it. The next morning, Jada barely slept. She ran on pure adrenaline, shuffling between meetings, checking in with each department, and coordinating with Clara to ensure everything was back on track. The recovery had been a temporary fix, but Jada knew it wouldn't be enough to guarantee success. The only way to ensure they met the deadline was to make up for lost time. When the afternoon came, Clara pulled her aside, her face ashen. Jada, I've been reviewing everything again, Clara said quietly, her voice tight. We're still behind. We might be able to make the technical deadline, but the legal department's review process, they're asking for more time. Jada's stomach sank. The legal team's review was the final step before they could send the project to Musk, and if they didn't get approval, the project would be delayed by at least a week. We can't afford that, Jada said firmly, rubbing her temples. We don't have the luxury of time anymore. We've worked too hard to fall short now. Clara nodded. I know, but there's nothing we can do. The legal team's review is their process. We can't rush it. Jada thought for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. If they didn't find a way to speed things up, they would miss the deadline, and Elon Musk wouldn't hesitate to pull the plug. Suddenly, an idea clicked in Jada's mind. I'll take care of it, she said. I'll personally handle the legal team's review. If we need to push things through faster, I'll make it happen. Clara raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? You've got enough on your plate as it is? I know, Jada said, her voice steady. But if this is going to work, I need to be in control of every step, every department, every person. I'll make it happen. Jada didn't wait for approval. She marched straight to the legal department, where she found the team going through the final contract clauses. With her heart pounding, she walked into the meeting room. I need you to expedite the review, Jada said, her voice calm but firm. I can't afford any delays. If there are any issues, we'll address them, but I need everything pushed through today. The legal team exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by Jada's sudden request, but they knew who she was, and they knew the stakes. Okay, the head of legal said reluctantly. We'll make it happen. Jada barely had time to breathe. As the hours ticked down, she felt the crushing pressure once again. The final review was in progress, and with each passing moment, she could feel the walls closing in. Her mind was racing, every scenario running through her head. Could they make it? Could she truly pull this off? She had one final shot, and if she missed it, everything would be over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Jada's facing her toughest challenge yet. Can she beat the clock and prove herself to Elon Musk? Or will she fail when it matters most? Stay tuned. The final stretch is coming. The clock was ticking down like a bomb, with only moments left before detonation. Jada felt the weight of every second. Every decision, every move she made, had led her to this moment. There was no going back now. The legal review had been completed and approved with minimal changes, but time was slipping away, and the final deliverables still needed to be polished. She could feel the heat rising in her chest as she walked briskly through the halls of Innovate Tech, heading to the boardroom for the final presentation. Her mind was in overdrive. She needed to keep her cool. There was no room for panic now, even though the stakes were higher than ever. When Jada entered the boardroom, it was almost surreal. The large conference table, the sleek monitors lining the walls, and the cluster of people from Innovate Tech, Next Tech, and the legal team all focused on the final product. Elon Musk was at the head of the table, his usual calm but piercing gaze fixed on her as she walked in. "Jada," Musk said, his voice devoid of any warmth but not yet dismissive. "You're here just in time." Her heart skipped. This is it. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, the gravity of the situation hit her all over again. She couldn't afford to be weak now, not when so much was on the line. "Everything's in place," Jada said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy surging within her. "The legal team has completed their review. The technical team is ready, and we're meeting all of Next Tech's requirements. The timeline is back on track." She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, waiting to hear the verdict. She didn't look at any of them, not yet. Her focus was squarely on Musk. Musk gave a brief nod, his face unreadable. "I'm hearing the facts, but I need to see the results. What guarantees do you have for us?" Jada's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. "No excuses, no hesitation. I guarantee that the product will be delivered on time, with the quality you expect. We've accounted for every challenge, every potential roadblock, and the team has given everything to make sure we meet the deadline." She knew that wasn't enough. Guarantees were important, but they weren't enough to win Musk's trust, not yet. She had to show him, not just tell him. With a nod from Musk, she gave Clara the signal to begin the final demo. Clara walked to the front, clicking through a series of slides that showed the project's progress and the testing results. The numbers were impressive, the stats showing clear growth and success. But Jada knew that the next part, the demo of the actual product, would be the moment of truth. As Clara continued her presentation, Jada glanced over at Elon. His face was still unreadable. She couldn't tell whether he was impressed or simply waiting for the moment to pick apart their work. It had always been like this with Musk, never showing too much emotion, never giving too much away. That made every gesture, every reaction, seem magnified. When Clara finished, Jada stood up and walked over to the central screen. "I'd like to show you the product in action." With a few quick keystrokes, Jada activated the live demo. The system sprang to life, an elegant display of software running smoothly, with fast response times, high efficiency, and the kind of seamless user interface that would make any tech enthusiast take notice. As she demonstrated its capabilities, Jada could feel a familiar weight pressing on her chest. Each feature, each interaction was flawless. There were no hiccups, no bugs to interrupt the demo. This was the culmination of all the long hours, all the setbacks and moments of doubt. But just as the demo was nearing its peak, something unexpected happened. A loud, sharp beep echoed from the system, followed by a glitch in the screen. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. Jada's heart dropped into her stomach. She couldn't believe it. A technical issue. Now, of all times. She glanced at Clara, who was already rushing over to the terminal. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to resolve the problem. Jada could feel her breath catch. This was the worst possible timing. She could see the disapproving looks forming on the faces of the team, on Musk's face. But then something clicked in Jada's mind. She couldn't just stand there, frozen. She couldn't let this derail everything. She stepped forward. "Clara, reset the system and run the diagnostics. We're not giving up yet." Clara nodded quickly, her fingers already moving to fix the error. The seconds felt like hours. Every moment stretched out before her. Jada forced herself to breathe. She could see Musk's eyes narrowing, watching the scene unfold, his gaze unreadable. She couldn't afford to lose him now, not when they were so close to the finish line. Then, in a quiet voice that could barely be heard, Musk spoke. "What happened?" Jada's voice was calm, though her pulse raced. "A minor glitch. It's been resolved." She paused, steadying herself. "It won't affect the overall outcome. We're still on track." The room was tense as Clara worked to restart the system. The minutes dragged on, every second feeling like a test of Jada's resolve. Finally, the screen flickered back on, and the demo continued, glitch-free this time. When it was over, the room fell silent. Everyone waited for Musk's reaction. Jada held her breath, knowing this was the moment. She had done everything she could, everything her team had done. For this one chance, Musk took a long, deliberate pause before leaning back in his chair. He folded his hands together, studying her intently. "Impressive," he said finally. His voice was cool, but there was a hint of something else, maybe respect, maybe admiration. "The technical issues aside, the product works. It's exactly what we need. The fact that you handled the problem under pressure, that shows something." Jada's heart skipped a beat. He liked it. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd pull it off," Musk continued, his tone slightly more relaxed. "But you did. You and your team. This has potential. You've earned the next phase." Jada felt a rush of relief. She couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face, but she forced herself to remain composed. "We won't let you down, Elon. This is only the beginning," she said, her voice filled with conviction. Musk nodded, looking around the room. "All right. I'll have my team run some final checks, but you've done the hard part. We'll be in touch soon about the next steps." As the meeting concluded and everyone started filing out of the room, Jada stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. She had done it. Despite the setbacks, despite the challenges, she had delivered. She had proven herself. Clara walked up to her, a look of relief on her face. "You did it, Jada. I can't believe you kept your cool." Jada gave a small laugh, but inside, she was still processing everything. The pressure, the fear, the doubt, all of it had led to this moment. And somehow, she had made it through. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her efforts lift. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The days after the presentation to Elon Musk were a whirlwind. Jada's team had been working nonstop, finalizing every aspect of the project, ironing out the remaining kinks, and preparing for the next big phase. Elon Musk had given his approval for the project to move forward, but the journey was far from over. Now, Jada was focused on ensuring that everything was in place for the final stretch, getting the product to market, staying ahead of any competitors, and keeping the momentum going. But something was off. Jada couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything going according to plan, something unexpected was waiting to derail it all. Every day, she checked her email, looked over reports, and listened to her team. But in the back of her mind, a nagging doubt continued to grow. It was on a particularly late evening, when she was reviewing a new round of user testing feedback, that the first signs of trouble appeared. Clara knocked lightly on her office door before entering. "Jada, we need to talk," Clara said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. Jada straightened up in her chair. "What's wrong?" Clara closed the door behind her, then leaned against it. Her eyes were full of concern. "I just spoke with the head of Nextech's development team. They've discovered a flaw. A big one." Jada's pulse immediately quickened. "What kind of flaw?" Clara sighed. "It's the core algorithm. Apparently, it's not scaling as well as we thought. When we push the system to higher loads, there's a significant lag, a delay that could break the whole product. And we only have a week to address it before the beta testing phase kicks off." Jada felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The system had been performing so smoothly in testing. Everything had looked perfect. How could this happen now, when they were so close? "Do we know what's causing it?" Jada asked, trying to maintain her composure. Clara shook her head. "It's complicated. The algorithm worked for most of our smaller scale tests, but with the stress of larger volumes, it's failing to deliver. We think it's something with the data processing pipeline, the integration point, but we haven't pinned it down yet." Jada leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. A week. They had a week before beta testing, a week to fix a fundamental flaw in the system. The pressure was unbearable, but Jada knew one thing for certain. She couldn't afford to let it show. "Okay," Jada said after a long pause. "We need to assemble the team. All hands on deck. Let's get to the bottom of this." Clara nodded and walked out to gather the team. Jada sat in her office for a few moments longer, the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. This wasn't just a minor bug or glitch, it was a critical flaw, and if they didn't solve it, everything they had worked for could come crashing down. The next morning, Jada called an emergency meeting. The entire development team, including Clara, was gathered around the conference table. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Everyone knew how high the stakes were. Clara was the first to speak. We're dealing with a bottleneck in the data flow. The load balancing system is failing under heavier traffic. The algorithm isn't designed to scale beyond a certain threshold. Jada nodded, absorbing the information. How long will it take to fix this? Clara looked down at her tablet, scrolling through some data. It depends. The immediate fix could be quick, just some tweaks to the algorithm to improve processing speed. But that would only be a temporary solution. If we don't fix the core issue, it could resurface later in production. And we don't have time to test for that. Jada took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. We'll have to do both. Fix the short-term issue to get us through beta testing, and then work on a permanent solution after that. But we don't have the luxury of time. Everyone needs to be on the same page. The room fell silent as everyone got to work. Jada watched them dive into the details, throwing around technical jargon that went over her head. But she knew this wasn't the time to get bogged down by the specifics. She had to keep her focus on the big picture. There were still only 7 days left before the next phase, and every second counted. As the hours dragged on, Jada barely left her desk. The office was filled with the sound of clattering keyboards, hushed conversations, and the occasional frustrated sigh. By the end of the day, they had identified the root cause of the issue, a fault in the data indexing system that caused delays when high levels of data were accessed simultaneously. It wasn't the entire algorithm at fault, but a specific module that managed incoming requests. Clara's team had already started working on a patch, but Jada knew that it wouldn't be enough. They needed more time to make sure it wouldn't cause issues down the line. But time was something they didn't have. The next morning, Jada's phone rang with an incoming call from Elon Musk. Her stomach flipped. "This is it." "Jada," Musk's voice came through, calm but firm. "I've been briefed on the issues with the product. What's the status?" Jada hesitated for a moment. There was no sugarcoating it. She had to be honest. "We've identified the issue, and we're already working on a fix. We've isolated the problem to the data indexing system. A patch is in progress, and we're confident it'll hold up through the beta testing phase. But we need time to ensure it's completely stable." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Jada could practically hear Musk calculating in his mind, weighing the risk. "You're sure this won't delay the launch?" he asked, his voice colder than before. "We're doing everything possible to stay on schedule," Jada replied, keeping her voice steady. "The team is on it, and we're pushing as hard as we can. We won't miss the timeline." Musk sighed. "All right, I'm giving you until the end of the week. If there's any more delay after that, we'll have to reconsider our options." Jada's heart raced. Understood. She ended the call, trying to stay calm, but inside, she was a storm. This was the moment. The next few days would determine whether they could pull off the impossible or whether it would all fall apart. By the end of the week, the pressure had reached its breaking point. The team had worked day and night to fix the system, but Jada couldn't help feeling the weight of Musk's ultimatum hanging over her like a sword. They had managed to get the patch ready for beta testing, but there was no guarantee it would hold up under the pressure. Friday morning came, and with it, a final, nerve-wracking meeting with Elon Musk. Jada knew that this would be the last chance to prove they could deliver. As she walked into the room, she took one last deep breath. "Jada," Musk said as she entered, "let's see if you've fixed the problem." Jada gave a small nod. "We have. But we need your team to run one last round of testing to make sure it meets your standards." Musk eyed her carefully. "I'm trusting you on this. This is your final chance." As the team ran the final test, Jada's heart pounded in her chest. Every number that popped up on the screen seemed to carry more weight than the last. But when the test completed without a hitch, and the system delivered flawless performance even under extreme load, she finally allowed herself to breathe. Musk glanced at the results, then looked up at Jada. His gaze softened slightly. "You did it, Jada," he said, his tone begrudgingly approving. "The product works. You've earned my trust. Jada felt a rush of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was still filled with challenges. But for now, they had one. The final test had been passed, the project was greenlit, and Jada's team was on top of the world. For the first time in months, there was a brief moment of calm. The kind of calm that felt almost unnatural, like the silence before a storm. But Jada wasn't fooled. She knew that they had only crossed one hurdle, and the race wasn't over yet. Still, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Elon Musk had given his stamp of approval, the product was functioning perfectly under stress, and the team was preparing for the launch phase. In the grand scheme of things, they had accomplished what many thought was impossible. Jada spent the next few days finalizing the marketing materials with the team, prepping for the product rollout, and ironing out logistical details. There was a sense of unity in the air. Everyone was focused, determined, and motivated. Clara was constantly by her side, overseeing the technical side of things, while the rest of the team worked on finalizing the back end. But there was a lingering feeling that Jada couldn't shake. Despite the victories, she knew better than to believe everything was settled. The real test had yet to come, the public debut. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and updates, Jada decided to take a break. She walked out of the office, the city skyline glowing under the night sky, a brief escape from the tension that had built up over the past several weeks. She pulled out her phone and checked her messages. The usual work-related texts, a few from Clara, and one unexpected one. A message from her sister, Maria. Jada, how's everything going? You've been on this project for months now. I hope you're not burning yourself out. Let's catch up soon. Love you. Jada smiled at the message. Maria always had a way of grounding her, of reminding her that there was more to life than work, no matter how important it seemed at the time. She typed a quick reply. It's crazy right now, but we're getting closer to launch. I'll make time for us soon, I promise. Love you too. For the first time in what felt like ages, Jada felt the weight on her shoulders ease just a little. I'll make time for myself. I will. After this launch. But as she put her phone down and turned to head back inside, a new email notification popped up on her screen. It was from Elon Musk. Jada's heart skipped a beat as she opened it. The subject line was simple, urgent. Product launch. She clicked on it. The message was short, but it carried an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Jada, I just spoke with the team at Nextech. There's an issue with the launch. I need you to come to a meeting tomorrow morning. It's critical. Be ready. Jada blinked, her mind racing. An issue? What issue? They had cleared every hurdle, passed every test, and the product had performed flawlessly in every scenario. What could go wrong now? Without wasting any time, Jada sent a quick reply. Understood. I'll be there. She stared at the screen for a few more moments, her thoughts in a whirl. Everything had been moving so smoothly. What was happening now? The next morning, Jada walked into the meeting room with a heavy heart, anxiety clawing at her insides. When she entered, the room was already filled with key players from both Innovatech and Nextech. Elon Musk was seated at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a rare expression of concern. Good morning, Jada, Musk said, his voice almost too cold for comfort. Take a seat. We have a serious issue to discuss. Jada nodded, trying to hide the nervousness in her chest. She sat down and gave a brief glance around the room. Clara was there, looking equally uneasy. What's going on? Jada asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. There's a major problem with the integration process. It seems that Nextech's systems aren't fully compatible with our new product. There's a conflict with the way your system processes real-time data and how their systems handle transactions. It's causing significant latency in certain environments. Jada's mind spun. Latency? That was a technical issue, yes, but surely they had accounted for every possible scenario during testing, hadn't they? She glanced at Clara, who was already pulling up the data on her tablet. We didn't encounter this in testing, Clara said, her voice tinged with frustration. We simulated high-load environments, and the data flow seemed fine. Are you sure it's an issue with the integration and not something within Nextech's infrastructure? Elon didn't flinch. We ran the tests on our side too, and it's evident. The lag is unacceptable, and if we push forward with the launch as planned, we risk losing everything. The entire product could be rendered obsolete before it even gets to market. Jada felt a sinking feeling in her chest. They were right. If Nextech's systems couldn't work in sync with their product, it would mean the difference between success and failure. The entire foundation they had built could crumble, and with it, everything they had worked for. We don't have time to fix this before the launch, Musk continued. So we need to decide what to do. I can't move forward without a clear solution. Jada swallowed hard. How long do we have? A week at most. If we can't find a solution by then, we'll have to postpone the launch indefinitely, Elon replied, his voice matter of fact. Jada felt her stomach turn. A week? A week to fix something that could take months to resolve properly. The pressure was unimaginable. After the meeting ended, Jada stood in the hallway, alone for the first time in hours. Her mind was reeling. How did this happen? How did we miss this? Clara joined her a few minutes later, her face taut with frustration. This doesn't make sense. We tested everything. Every possible configuration. How could we have missed something so critical? Jada sighed, rubbing her forehead. I don't know, but we need to fix it. Fast. The next few hours were spent diving deep into the system's architecture, working tirelessly to pinpoint the source of the incompatibility. Jada was running on fumes, fueled only by caffeine and sheer determination. As the hours passed, an idea began to form. Maybe it wasn't about reworking the entire system. It was about finding a compromise, a workaround that would enable both systems to work together seamlessly. A patch to address the integration issue without changing the product's core. But would it be enough to meet Elon's standards? Later that evening, as Jada paced back and forth in her office, Clara entered with a tired but hopeful look on her face. I think we've found it, she said. We can apply a dynamic load balancing solution that allows both systems to operate in parallel without the lag issue. It won't be perfect, but it will work. Jada's heart lifted slightly. How long would it take to implement? Clara glanced at her tablet. If we can get the resources we need, it'll take us about 48 hours to get the patch live. Jada nodded, making a decision. Do it. We'll have to work around the clock, but this is our shot. If we don't fix this, we won't have another chance. As the team rallied together, pulling all-nighters to implement the fix, Jada couldn't help but think about how far they'd come and how close they were to losing it all. But if there was one thing she had learned throughout this journey, it was this: never back down, never give up. The next 48 hours would decide everything. The pressure was on. The hours bled together in a blur of activity, tension, and relentless focus. Jada barely had time to process the magnitude of the situation. All that mattered was the fix. Clara's team worked around the clock, diving deep into the code, while Jada coordinated with Elon Musk's team, ensuring they were aligned and that every possible contingency was covered. The pressure was mounting, but in the back of her mind, Jada knew this was it. This was the moment they would either rise or fall. They were in the final stretch now, just 48 hours to implement the patch and run the critical tests that would determine whether the product could launch on time. The whole team was working in overdrive. Clara had arranged for extra resources, pulling in developers and engineers from other projects within Innovate Tech to lend a hand. The office, usually filled with quiet hums of productivity, was now a flurry of activity, with people speaking in hushed tones, typing furiously, and meeting in small huddles. Jada's mind raced. There was no room for error now. The patch needed to work perfectly in every scenario, and they couldn't afford even a single glitch. She had seen her fair share of setbacks and failures in her career, but never one that felt so personal. This was no longer just about a project. This was about her reputation, her team's survival, and the future of the company. If they couldn't deliver now, everything would crumble. At 3 a.m. on the second day, Jada stepped into the conference room, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her. Clara was there, hunched over her laptop, eyes bloodshot but sharp. Any updates? Jada asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Clara looked up, her face grim but determined. The patch is almost ready. We've tested it internally, and the system is responding much better. But we're still not sure how it will hold up when Nextech pushes it through their integration tests. If something fails there, we won't have time to fix it. Jada nodded, already knowing the stakes. She crossed her arms, pacing the room as she tried to stay calm. Okay, we need to be ready for that. I'll coordinate with Musk's team and prepare them for testing. If they spot something, we need a plan to fix it immediately. Clara gave a tired smile. I'll stay on top of the integration. If anything goes wrong, we'll find a solution, even if we have to rework it on the fly. Jada appreciated Clara's resolve. She was truly the backbone of this project, and without her expertise, they would have been sunk by now. But there was still the looming shadow of uncertainty. Would it work? Would it really hold up? They spent the next few hours fine-tuning the patch, ensuring that all variables were accounted for. As the sun began to rise, the weight of the deadline was upon them. Elon Musk's team had already been informed that the patch would be ready for testing, and Jada knew they would be watching closely, scrutinizing every detail. At 9 a.m., Jada received a call from Elon Musk himself. Her stomach twisted at the sight of his name on the screen. She'd been bracing herself for this moment, but that didn't make it any easier. Jada, it's time. We're about to run the integration tests. Are you ready? She took a deep breath. We're ready, Elon. The patch is in place, and we've done everything we can to ensure it works. But we both know that this is the moment of truth. Musk's voice was calm, almost too calm. Good. We'll push it through, and we'll let you know if anything goes wrong. Get your team ready. This needs to work. Jada hung up the phone, feeling a surge of adrenaline shoot through her veins. This was it. This was where all their hard work, sweat, and sleepless nights would pay off, or fail spectacularly. She walked over to Clara's desk, where she found the rest of the team gathered. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the first test results to come in. There were no words needed. The tension in the room was palpable. Each person knew that their future, their careers, their company's survival depended on what happened in the next few hours. As the clock ticked toward the testing window, Jada received an email from Musk's team. The subject line read, "Integration test results critical." Her heart raced as she opened it. The first few lines were filled with technical jargon, making her head spin, but then her eyes landed on the final paragraph. After running the integration test with Nextech Systems, the patch has successfully resolved the latency issue. The systems are now operating in sync, and there is no significant lag or failure. However, we will continue monitoring the system throughout the day to ensure stability. The launch is on schedule. Jada froze, staring at the words. It was the moment she had been waiting for. They did it. They had fixed the problem. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to ensure the product could move forward. They had earned a second chance, and more importantly, they had earned Elon Musk's trust. Later that day, Jada gathered her team in the conference room to share the good news. She could see the exhaustion and the relief in their faces. They had fought through the storm and come out victorious. "We did it," Jada said, her voice cracking slightly. "The patch worked. The product is good to go. We're on schedule for the launch." The room erupted in cheers and applause, the tension finally breaking. Clara let out a relieved laugh, and even the most jaded engineers exchanged high fives. But Jada wasn't done yet. She still had one more task ahead. The launch? The world would soon be watching, and there was no turning back now. They had come too far to fail. The following week, Innovate Tech's product was unveiled to the world. The launch event was a spectacle, streamed live across social media, attended by industry leaders, investors, and tech enthusiasts. Jada stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the crowd settle into their seats. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. The countless hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, all of it had led to this moment. Her team had delivered something groundbreaking, and they were on the verge of changing the industry. As Elon Musk took the stage, Jada stood in the shadows, watching. Her mind raced as he spoke about the product's potential, the future of technology, and how they were on the cusp of something revolutionary. His words were powerful, but in that moment, Jada knew one thing for sure. This was her moment, too. The next few weeks would be critical. There would be more tests, more challenges, and more unknowns. But for now, Jada allowed herself to take a deep breath and bask in the success of what they had just achieved. She had fought, sacrificed, and overcome every obstacle in her way. And now, there was no stopping her. The days following the successful product launch were a whirlwind. The world had taken notice of Innovate Tech's groundbreaking achievement, and Jada's name was now being mentioned alongside the biggest players in the tech world. Headlines hailed the product as a game-changer, and investors were clamoring to get in on the next big thing. But Jada wasn't interested in the praise or the accolades. She was focused on something far more important, the future. Jada walked into her office, her mind spinning. The work hadn't stopped just because the product was out in the world. In fact, the real work was just beginning. With the success of the launch, the expectations were higher than ever, and there was no time to rest. Innovate Tech's board had already scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss future projects, and Jada knew that the next step in her career would require more than just managing a successful product. She had to lead, and lead with vision. As she sat at her desk, the phone rang. It was Elon Musk. She hadn't heard from him since the product launch. Her pulse quickened as she answered. "Jada," Elon said, his voice calm as always, "I've been keeping an eye on the feedback. The product's performing well, but there's something I want to discuss with you." Jada's heart skipped a beat. "Of course, Elon. What's on your mind?" "I think you're ready for something bigger," Elon said, and there was a quiet intensity in his tone. "I've been thinking about the direction of Innovate Tech, and there's a big opportunity coming up. A project that could change the industry. I want you to lead it." Jada blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. "What kind of project?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something revolutionary," he replied. "You've proven yourself with this product, Jada, but I think you're capable of more. You've got the vision, the leadership skills, and the determination to take on something bigger than anyone else. Innovate Tech needs someone like you at the helm for what's coming next." Jada sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had always wanted to lead, but the idea of taking on something that could truly change the course of history was overwhelming. Could she do it? Could she really be the one to lead Innovate Tech into the future? Before she could answer, Elon continued, "I've already had a few meetings with key partners, and they're all on board. But we'll need to move quickly. This is an opportunity that won't wait around for anyone." Jada's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was it, the moment that could define the rest of her career. But could she live up to the challenge? "I'll need some time to think about it," Jada said, her voice more composed than she felt. "This is a big decision." "Take your time," Elon said, though his tone suggested he knew she was already sold. "But know this, Innovate Tech's future is in your hands now. You've proven yourself. You've earned it." The call ended, and Jada sat there for a few minutes, staring at the screen. She thought about everything she had been through to get to this point. The setbacks, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the victories. She had fought so hard to get here. And now, the path ahead was even more uncertain, but also more exciting than anything she had ever imagined. Later that day, Jada sat down with Clara in the company's break room. They had both been through the ringer, and while Clara's technical expertise had always been invaluable, it was Jada's leadership and ability to make the tough calls that had carried them through. "Clara," Jada began, her voice serious, "Elon wants me to lead the next big project at Innovate Tech. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge risk. I don't know if I'm ready for it." Clara looked at her, her expression thoughtful. "Jada, you're the reason we got here. You're the one who kept pushing when everyone else was ready to give up. If anyone can lead Innovate Tech into the future, it's you." Jada felt a surge of gratitude toward Clara. She had always been her rock, someone who understood her like no one else did. But still, the weight of the decision hung heavy on her shoulders. "I don't know, Clara," Jada said quietly. "This project, it could change everything. I mean, what if I fail? What if I'm not the right person for the job?" "You won't fail," Clara said with a calm certainty that Jada admired. "You've already proven that you can rise to any challenge. This is just the next step in your journey." Jada smiled, appreciating Clara's unwavering faith in her. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." Clara gave her a playful nudge. "Don't get all sentimental on me now, Jada. You've got a world-changing project to lead." That evening, Jada found herself standing on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city. The lights below twinkled, each one representing a person, a story, a dream. Was this the beginning of her own dream? She had started this journey as a waitress in a luxury restaurant, uncertain of where it would take her. And now, here she was, standing on the brink of something much bigger. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It's time, she thought. It's time to step into the future. The next morning, Jada called Elon Musk back. Her decision had been made. I'm in, she said, her voice steady and confident. Let's do this. In the months that followed, Jada led Innovate Tech through one of the most ambitious and transformative projects in the company's history. She had proven herself time and time again, rising from a black waitress insulted in a luxury restaurant to a visionary leader who changed the face of the tech world. But for Jada, the true victory wasn't just in the recognition or the accolades. It was in the journey itself, the lessons she had learned, the people who had helped her along the way, and the knowledge that she had the power to shape her own destiny. As Innovate Tech's future unfolded, one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The world was full of possibilities, and Jada was ready to take them on, one bold step at a time. Thank you for following Jada's incredible journey. Her rise from humble beginnings to tech leader shows that no dream is too big and no obstacle too great. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a comment below. What was your favorite part of Jada's story? What challenges do you think she'll face in the future? We can't wait to hear your thoughts.